You have in front of you a handout that will explain a little bit about the McKee Learning Lunch. You will receive information via email as to links to previous learning lunches, to the reports, to the videos of them. This is being videoed this evening, and it will be produced into a final report that's written and a final report that is video. And all that will be available to you. So we're documenting what we're doing. The McKee Learning Lunch is one of a number of activities that the McKee Chair of Excellence in Learning, which I happen to hold that position, and I'm honored beyond words to say that. And we are very fortunate this evening to have a member of the McKee family, Rusty McKee, over here. And we are forever grateful to the family for endowing this position. And one of the primary purposes of the position was to improve or at least support the relationship between the university and the community. And this McKee Chair of Excellence sponsored McKee Learning Lunch is one of the primary examples of how we do that. We attack what sometimes are called difficult questions that there may not be an answer to. Like, what is the value of play? What do we mean by play? I don't know about you, but I've heard so many definitions of play, and what kids are doing these days isn't necessarily even called play. So I remember my mother saying to my brother and me, "Go out and play." We knew what to do. We went out and did whatever we wanted to do. And that's what we call play. Well, that's not necessarily what it's called these days. So we're going to discuss that, and our speakers will address it. But before we do that, there is an assignment. In front of you is a 3x5 card. On that card, you should write a question. Any question that comes to mind relative to play. And don't think too hard about it, just write down whatever. We're going to collect these. It will be considered as part of the final report. So just any question that you can think of about play. You've got about a minute and a half to do that. And just when you're finished, put the cards in a little pile in the middle of the table beside the other pile that's already there. Looks like everybody's finished. Okay. That was the first assignment. Now we have special guest speakers, co-speakers, that are going to share with you some ideas about play. This is a short presentation, and then we have lunch and discussion. We will discuss the 3 questions that you received in your email while you enjoy lunch. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you our 2 speakers. Brandy Mangan, who is the lead school psychologist in Bradley County Schools and adjunct faculty at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. and Katie Curley, speech language pathologist in Bradley County Schools. Where are you? This is Brandy Mangan, and this is Katie Curley. Sorry, thank you. Here.
Is this one working as well? Can you hear me? Oh, that's a little bit loud. I'm not used to a microphone. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Dr. Tucker. Katie and I have worked together for about 14 years, I think. We are 2 members of our preschool evaluation team. So we get to work with preschool students district-wide all the time. It's one of the best parts of what we get to do. So thank you for having us, and we look forward to chatting.
So like she said, my name is Katie Curley. I've worked in the schools for a long time, and I also am a graduate of UT Knoxville with a specific concentration in working with hearing impaired students. So I've spent a lot of time evaluating preschoolers, a lot of time playing with preschoolers, a lot of time treating preschoolers. So this is one of my favorite topics, and so we're excited to be here with you guys today. So this is a quote by Fred Rogers. "Play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood." A lot of times in education, we hear people say, just let them play. Well, what does that really mean? Because a lot of their time is so structured, but we know that there's value in playing and value in the types of play that they engage in. And it also provides them a significant amount of practice with a variety of skills and things that they need to learn that we're going to discuss today.
One of the first things we'll talk about is the fact that the United Nations considers play to be a right of all children. This would indicate that according to the United Nations, play is equal in its importance to a lot of other things that children are guaranteed access to, like education, quality air, good food, all of those things. Play has been present throughout history and is found in all cultures. So there's a lot of emphasis on the importance of play. Typically in the United States, our children are not facing the kinds of adverse living situations that many children are across the world. For the most part, children living in the United States are not facing war and famine, things like exploitation, extreme violence, although we would be remiss if we did not mention the fact that in the United States, according to the CDC, the leading cause of death for children is firearms. And obviously, that could potentially impact children's access to play. Other ways that children's access to play can be limited in the United States are things like an excessively hurried lifestyle. In addition to that, extreme focus on academic performance and excessively organized activities. Obviously, involvement in activities is really important for kids, but when we overload our children and there's no time for child-directed play, that has the potential to cause really long-lasting issues with our kiddos. We will differentiate the difference between child-directed play and adult-directed play. So child-directed play is where the research is. That's what the research would suggest to us, that child-directed play, self-choice and self-directed play, is really where we see benefits and overarching development. Play allows children to role play, manage stress, exhibit creativity, build confidence, control their world to a certain extent, and maybe most importantly, experience failure.
So there's lots of different categories of play and different ways to play. The first one is physical play, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Chase, hide and seek, It's important to be outside and be able to explore and be able to engage in those things that might not be available indoors. Expressive play. This is where we start to see creativity emerging with children, where they have an opportunity to finger paint or play with Play-Doh. We start to see that creativity emerge with expressive play. Manipulative play. This is where we really start to see that idea of cause and effect coming into play, where children are learning that skill. We've all played the game where a baby drops something from a high chair and we pick it up. And the baby is really learning a lot through that interaction. But interestingly, when we were looking at some videos on YouTube, the first 8 or 10 options were how to get your child to stop doing this. Well, that's not really, when we're thinking about the development of that child in play, we don't want them to stop doing that, right? We want them to continue to explore their environment, continue to practice those interactions, and learn from that, and learn that their facial expressions and their actions get a reaction from adults. That's where that child is really learning. There's symbolic play, where children use objects to represent other things, and this kind of starts to emerge around 12 to 18 months. And this is really, really crucial for a child's cognitive growth. And this is things like little boys using a stick and pretending it's a sword, using any object as a phone. We have seen so many different toys be used as a phone. That's a really common one. And also pretend play kind of starts to emerge here, where they realize that they can pretend something is something else. Dramatic play, lots of acting and exploration. And this is something you really see pretty common in preschool classrooms, of lots of centers set up with home living or a post office or a restaurant, where kids are starting to explore and play in those ways. And this is great for their vocabulary development and for social skills, because they have to play cooperatively with each other. It's kind of hard to play some of those pretend games by yourself. So it really forces them to interact with their peers and evolve from there. And then the last one is games, video games, card games, board games. The biggest thing I think with this is that it's really important to do it with someone else, whether it is with an adult or with a peer, so that interaction continues to grow. And they have opportunity through all of these types of play to just begin developing some problem-solving skills and figuring out what's next, or how can this be more imaginative, or how can I expand on this, and kind of they cause and effect when they're interacting with their peers of like, oh, she didn't like that didn't work, maybe I should do it a different way. So lots and lots of skills are developing through each of these categories.
The functions of play are multifaceted. The first of which is probably pretty obvious, that's physical development. This is where children are really practicing those fine and gross motor skills. They're running and chasing and hopping and skipping rope and building Legos and all those fun things that kids get to do. We see the benefit of that play in their physical development. We also see the benefit of that play in emotional development. One of the things that children learn through this process of play is not just coping skills or growing those imaginational skills, they're also learning healthy escapism, which will benefit them the rest of their lives. Cognitive development, we see children developing problem-solving skills. So for me, when I was a kid, we played outside a lot. And I knew every inch of my backyard. And those visual spatial skills that really developed, we were able to explore the forest behind our backyard, which really was kind of no man's land between two very large subdivisions. As an adult, I can recognize that was probably about 2 acres, but as a kid, it was this ginormous forest, and we knew every inch of it. Social development, we see children learning to separate from primary caregivers. With our preschool kiddos, this is one of our biggest obstacles. Turn taking, winning and losing, all of those really great things like conflict resolution and learning to advocate for oneself. Language development, which of course is Katie's area of expertise, that receptive and expressive language skills, but also pragmatic and vocabulary development. And then moral development, understanding which types of behaviors are acceptable or unacceptable. Maybe perhaps getting caught cheating in a game and experiencing those natural consequences, which are very powerful teachers for our kids.
Language development and play are very closely related and closely correlated to each other. Play provides lots of opportunities for practice and for learning. And not just, when I say communication, I'm not really just talking about talking and about words, right? They're practicing eye contact and turn taking and imitation, and those are all skills that are needed to be a successful communicator, and these are all practiced through play. There is a study that says that the quality of pretend and symbolic play are correlated with higher levels of language development. So kids that don't get these opportunities, we can see the consequences of that as they grow into school-age children. And play is a skill that for a lot of kids must be taught. There's absolutely a place for go outside and play, right? Or go to the playroom and play. There's a million toys in there, right? But sometimes they have to be taught how to play with the toys. If this is a family that doesn't go out to eat very much, their child's not going to know how to play restaurant, right? So a lot of it is some adult interaction and some adult guidance as well to teach kids how to play, or to play with the new toys, so that after you've taught them, then you can say, hey, go play with that, and the child has some skills to know how to do that. Object permanence is significantly related to rapid increases in vocabulary. This is when a child understands of, hey, I've got your bear, I'm going to hide it under the bed, and the kid knows, hey, I should look under the bed for the bear. They know that that object is still there, even if they can't visually see it in that moment. And that's highly, highly correlated to vocabulary. This one I think is so interesting. Pretend play is a good predictor of a child's future language skills and narrative retelling abilities and semantic organization. The more vivid the imagination, the more interactive the pretend play, that only helps that child to be a good communicator as they grow older. And I will mention here too, Brandy mentioned about child-directed play, and this is so important because it's not easy to, if you're trying to get a kid to play with what I want to play with, they're not necessarily that interested. They might not like that toy, but when you go with child-directed play, they're more engaged because it's something that they want to do. You're going to hold their attention for a little bit longer. Their interest level is peaked, and this just further promotes their learning through that play when it's something that they're interested in.
There is an age-related developmental sequence to the process of play. Play begins with solitary play. This begins in infancy, but it's important throughout the child's entire life. From that point in development, we move into parallel and onlooker play. Parallel play is frequently seen in our toddlers, where children are entering a center and playing alongside a peer. They're not necessarily playing with the same toys, but they're playing within the same space. They're next to each other. And simultaneously, we see onlooker play developing, which is where a child is watching another child play and benefiting from that observation. We also see social referencing starting to develop at this point, and that's super interesting to see. Dramatic play and imaginative play, we see this developing more in our older toddlers. This is acting out of real life situations. So kiddos who are playing kitchen and they're using appropriate tools or object substitution, which is frequently seen in our older toddlers. Can't find a phone? Use a banana. Associative play is group play with no real rules, right? And no formal organization. This is like chase that you see frequently in our younger kiddos. And then finally, cooperative play. And with cooperative play, there's an organization to this play. There's a leader, and then there's everybody else. There are people who are in the group, and there are people who are outside of the group. We see this skill developing in our older preschool students around the age of 4 to 6. This type of play is becoming pretty prominent.
So let's discuss briefly the impact of toys on play. Teachers really should make decisions and plan what toys are in their classroom, much in the same way you're making a lesson plan. It's very important to choose appropriate toys to encourage children to play. And generally the rule is less is more, right? Fewer toys promotes more quality in play because it promotes the kids to be imaginative and to think of different ways that they can play with the same thing. When you limit their options, you really are increasing play rather than decreasing play. Basic toys are better. Anything that can provide an open-ended play opportunity, things like blocks and Legos and Magnetiles, musical instruments, dolls, things that can be played with in a variety of ways and have multiple functions. Also, I think open-ended toys are great because as a child grows, they can play with them different ways, right? If you have a set of blocks, an infant may think it's funny to stack the blocks and then knock them over, right? And they're learning a lot of skills through that. But as kids grow, they may, build a farm for their animals or build a house, or they're pretending with other things and combining those blocks with other toys for more imaginative play. This kind of desire for open-ended play is what draws kids to an empty box, right? I think if you're a parent and you've had that experience at Christmas where your kids open this great toy and then they just want to play with the box, right? Well, there's a reason for that because kids like to use their imagination. They like to engage with things in that way. Some toys to avoid are ones where the child doesn't have to do anything, right? Like push a button and it all lights up and there's this big dance and show and then it's over and the kid's just sitting there passively watching. A lot of toys at my school, when we get new toys, sometimes I just take the batteries out, right? So that's not an option anymore, right? And they have to talk and they have to engage with me, and it goes from a passive activity to an active one. Any toy that only has one function is typically not a great toy. And electronics generally decrease verbal interaction. And not all electronics are bad, but like those toddler toys where it's like, oh, it's a baby laptop and your child's going to learn the whole alphabet and their colors and their numbers and their shapes from this one toy. Well, no, that's not likely to happen, right? Because all that toy is requiring the child to do is to push a button and that's it. And there's really not a lot of interaction from it. Any kind of toy that promotes kind of that instant gratification, it can kind of be just that one and done. I've had the experience with my kids where they get this great toy for Christmas and by New Year's they haven't even touched it anymore, right? Because it just has one function and once you've done it, you've done it. And it's not really promoting any of those types of play that we were discussing.
According to the research, some possible impacts of limiting play, and there are several, when our focus is on pressured achievement. And so frequently in our culture, that is our goal, right? Because we tend to be very individualistic culture by nature. We want our children to be high achievers, and there's nothing wrong with being high achievers, right? But when we put all of that pressure on students with that singular goal, the unintended consequences of that pressure can actually end up kind of backfiring for us, and we see higher levels of school avoidance and psychosomatic tendencies or symptoms. For our adolescents, this might look like significant difficulty transitioning to college. In addition to that, we know that across the board, we are seeing higher levels of anxiety and depression in children than we've ever seen, particularly for our emerging adults. In addition to that, we know that according to the research, there's a link between internalizing problems, perfectionistic tendencies, and overly critical self-evaluations, particularly when children don't do well academically. When every test is a high-stakes test, we run the risk of creating emerging adults that forsake our core values, such as honesty, for top academic achievements. And I think that we can all agree that's not really ideal. This is some information because I know that we're out of time, and my goodness, we could talk about this topic for hours. But just one last thing that I do want to point out with regards to screen time. This is information from the CDC that would suggest currently our 8 to 10-year-olds spend on average 6 hours a day in front of a screen using entertainment media. Our 11 to 14-year-olds are spending almost 9 hours a day. And our 15 to 18-year-olds, upwards of 7.5 hours per day in front of a screen using entertainment media. And of course, is that play?
I can't thank you enough. That is the most focused and comprehensive presentation on play I have ever heard. I have never even read an article that would provide more detailed information. And you will all receive this material in the final report, so you can refer to it as a reference. Thank you. And now we will have lunch and talk about the questions. In the center of your table are the 3 questions. And I want to just describe what you need to do, and then we'll release you by table to the buffet. Each of you have this sheet of paper to take your notes on. And we're going to assemble those, so be sure to write them in a way that we can read them, because this is a summary. Now, your first assignment here is to appoint, or you don't have to appoint, somebody can volunteer. We need a recorder if you need to do it one at a time, or you can all be recorders. And we need, most of all, a presenter. The presenter is going to present the results of your table's discussion at the final discussion that we will have at the end. So each table will be represented at this table here for a discussion at the end, which we will all be involved with, but that person will represent you primarily for each of the 3 questions. Any questions about that? Okay, then it's time to eat and talk. And you can decide who's going to be your presenter, however you want to do that. Could I have your attention, please? If you could have your reporter come to the table here, and it doesn't matter what order, just take one of the chairs. And why am I not surprised? Okay. The way we do this is we take each question and we go down the list from first group, second group, third group, fourth group, fifth group. And if you will please provide us a summary in whatever words you want to use of what your group decided about that question. And there's no... Okay? So, what is your definition of play? Use the microphone.
Our definition of play is an essential part of development that teaches individuals essential life skills. So we wanted to encapsulate all ages across the board.
All ages meaning even adults?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the first line again?
An essential part of development.
An essential part of development. That's pretty simple.
So our group decided that play is a process that is independent, creative, experiential. It's unguided or more self-directed, interactive with the environment, exploratory, and it has a social aspect.
That's pretty complex. Well, hang on, wait just a minute. Does that include all ages?
Does it include all ages? Yes.
Okay. Next.
This is cool. This makes me loud. Our group decided that the definition of play is also a multifaceted process that encourages imaginative engagement and facilitates experiences with the world around us through things such as communication, safety, and experiences.
All ages.
All ages. You good?
Okay.
We talked about it being structured and unstructured activities that children do for fun, or adults. I'll include that.
Repeat that. I missed that part.
Creative and imaginative and unique for each person, child or adult, and bringing the imagination creatively into the outside world.
Okay. Keyword there being imagination. Yeah.
So I got rid of the words that repeat what they said. And so I'll pull out the ones that remain. We talked about interest and challenge.
Hang on just a minute.
Yes.
Are you all having trouble hearing?
I want to talk without that microphone.
Oh,
I think it's much better. So now back to what I was saying. Okay, so I marked off the words that had already been repeated. So if it seemed disjointed, it probably is. But the components that came out of it were non-specific as far as ages. Nobody mentioned, and we didn't even talk about this ahead of time, nobody mentioned children or adults. We just simply talked about the activities around play, and it had to do with variety. It had to do with self or group directed, and a component of it was lack of assessment. There's not a test at the end, there's not a grade at the end, it is just whether it's enjoyment or challenge or whatever it is not something that's based on a grade that you get at the end that tells you how good you did.
So you can't fail at play.
Right.
All right, so by the way, the audience here can participate in any way you like, to add to or say, no, we didn't say that, or summarize it in some way. Do any of you have any comments you want to add to what the panel has stated in terms of the definition of play?
Well, I like the fact that you can't fail at play.
Hang on.
Okay, I'm loud enough as it is. I like the fact that you can't fail at play. I think that's monumental, and no evaluation there. That's quite significant.
I agree.
I think the other thing I would clarify is play is not necessarily team-based like we think of you get a score, because there is a different kind of assessment there. But when you talk about play, just the idea of play, it's very open-ended.
Well, yes.
I don't think anybody mentioned about you have to feel safe and also have to be relaxed when you're playing.
Very good. No. No, this is going into the recording, and that's important.
I think there's some element about participatory, that there's like sort of this sort of willingness, participatory engagement, whether it's, solitary or with a parent, but there's like this sort of equity there that there's no one person like sort of always dictating until you get to that higher, right, that group level where there's like rules and there's a leader, but you're still like willing to participate. So there's a desire there.
So this is a question: can there be an individual feeling of failure, and does that provide an opportunity for character development?
What do you think? I'll come back. No problem.
So I think that's the $1 million question, right? I think that not having an assessment, pass, fail, get a grade, super important, right? But experiencing failure, yeah. In our play, our kids do experience failure, and that's where they grow, right? I can't tell you how many times I fell off my bike, Of course, I'm telling you a whole lot about my motor skills and telling you that, but I did eventually become a very proficient bike rider, right? But I had to fail a lot in order to get to that point. And so I think that failure is real important for children's development.
Let me ask a question, if I may.
Well, in fact, I want to add to what she says. In fact, I read recently that if you look at the research carefully, learning is more about failure than it is about being right.
It's just a question, are there different types of play? I mean, there are some where there is no failure, then there is a type of play where there is failure and there's learning. I don't know, I'm just asking.
Good question.
Okay, I'm trying to track because it's morphed. So when you said participatory, because she's brilliant, because she works with me, I think of play, and I think this is part of why when I think this sort of drama-based lens, why the assessment piece needs to be thought about differently is because as a process, play is an invitation. And it's an invitation to explore an idea. That exploration can happen individually, in team, the context, but I think it's that openness to explore and constantly thinking about play as an invitation to explore because you don't always know what the goal is, right? Sometimes you're just playing for the sake of play, but it's also that awareness of in that moment you might develop a new exploration and then another invitation happens. So if we think about it as these series of invitations, I think it's a really interesting way to think about play as a process-oriented approach to learning.
I was just thinking with all these comments about the question of whether or not what it means to be human, I guess, is the capacity to play, just in a part of the essence of what it means to be human. Just like we're language-oriented creatures, and so that gives us a capacity for language, and that manifests in skills that we can assess in a hierarchy. Like, I'm really great with language, I have this aptitude for it, but that doesn't mean that if I do or don't in a measurable way, it does not mean I'm not a linguistic creature. And by the same token, I think play, just something about being human, we're drawn to play, and then through that play, I think there's a manifestation of certain skills that are directly connected to, I guess, whether or not there have been conditions set for me to feel safe and comfortable and to have the ability to live that out. And I was thinking immediately just about the connection between like science fiction and scientific development. That by having the space to play and imagine, and then I manipulate that and my ideas come out into the real world, that inspires, things that are happening at a more measurable level. And I kind of, a little wonky at the end, but if that makes sense.
I think play has a lot to do with choice. Going back to what the presentation was talking about, child-led versus adult-led, I would say 9 times out of 10, play is more playful when the child is, guiding what's happening rather than the adult. So we were talking about at our table at his school, high schoolers, they're located at an elementary school, and the high schoolers are choosing to play on the playground than choosing to do something else. So when you have different options for kids, they're probably going to choose what they want to rather than what they are expected to do or appointed to do. So choice has a lot to do with it as well.
I was going to also say, in your environment dictates your play. Like, where you raised it, I was just thinking, like, the environment I was in, it dictated what kind of play activities or my mom not being there. So your environment definitely starts what kind of play you can be able to do.
All right. So we have a very long definition of play. And I think they're all correct.
in the spirit of multiple right answers. So in the second question, we'll just go down. We'll actually start and we'll go the reverse order. So that way you don't always have to go first. You're welcome. And I know Dean Rutledge really well. She loves going first.
Just a little bit of competition here.
So what are the qualities of play that give it value?
So looking at all of our answers, we did not compare answers. We just answered and then put them together. The thing that seems to be consistent are words like creative. They talk about development. It's not just character development. It's development of skills, development of understanding. And we talked about the unstructured nature of a lot of play that allows students or children or adults to experiment and then to move forward from there.
We listed that it helps with physical, social, and emotional development, gross fine motor skills, socialization, communication, and self-regulation, and can help children cope with grief.
We stayed on this question for a really long time, and I'm sorry that you couldn't all hear the amazing conversation that occurred. So we listed some overarching ideas of what's important for kids and adults to play, and whatever that looks like. And safety was a big one. Is, you know, it does dictate. It's important to note that, you know, just because a child is partaking in a specific type of play, or the adult is, you know, engaging with those around them in a specific way, it's heavily influenced by what's happening around them. A big one is stress relief. You know, even as adults, Professor Mangan hit that we play to escape, escapism as well, kind of the world that we're in, you know, to give us a second to step back and just enjoy and embrace what's around us or who's around us. And engagement, you know, tying it all together is, if you're not engaged in what you're doing, and Allie hit on this really well, then you're not really getting from play what's intended to be gotten and achieved, if you will.
Our group touched on a lot of the same points about, you know, the coping and the ability to develop those physical, social, emotional skills. And we really talked a lot about how play is a multi-sensory experience that through that experience provides natural scaffolding for children. And so you're kind of setting up the prior knowledge for them to be successful in the future in a whole bunch of different areas. And so I thought that was a really key takeaway, at least from our conversation on this point. We also talked about how it does help develop goal setting, because kind of through that self-directed learning, you're discovering what your passions are, what your interests are, you're developing your personality a little bit, but you're also figuring out what is important and what makes sense to spend your time doing. And so we thought that that was an important aspect of the quality of play as well.
We also touched on a good chunk of all of those things. Like they said, like we can teach so many skills through play. And then we also talked about how it doesn't take much and you never outgrow play. So, I mean, like the go outside mindset of going out and being able to explore your whole backyard. Like, that teaches so much, and all you need is the outdoors. So the value in that, you don't need a big fancy anything to be able to engage in play and learn those skills. We also talked about how it encourages like a growth mindset, how you're always wanting to like learn more and grow with play. If you are engaging in cause and effect play, that can very much encourage a growth mindset with figuring out problem solving and going from there on that. So we kind of touched on all of that as well. So. Do you want it back? Yeah. Awesome.
I'm so sorry. Where are we?
I can summarize real quickly. Okay. So brilliant women at the table. We kind of have a spectrum in a way, where we talked about the qualities of play, you know, going from almost unstructured, and Chris, I'll go to like that natural scaffolding, and then somewhere in between those, there's a lot of skill development, social, cognitive, physical, but then there's also this aspect of context, whether it's outside, inside, how we experience it, where we experience it. Awesome.
Good. You did good. You get an A. Now, we don't grade play, and this is play, right? So you don't get an fact, I wrote an article once titled, "Would Jesus Give an F?" And I won't go into the details. But I basically concluded that he would not. And that's just my opinion. But play is supposed to be fun, right? Can you not have fun and play? What if you're forced to play?
I would like to touch on that. At my core, I'm an only child. So play for me was not by having fun in a group. If there was a ball, I was miserable. And so I think that's a great question of that play doesn't always constitute fun for some people. But I will say that, on this whole idea of failing grows you, it was in those moments that I found out what play really meant to me. So just in the moments that I didn't necessarily have fun, if it weren't for those moments, I wouldn't understand play in my own view as I do now. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
It's what I hear you saying is more about self-directed learning than it is about having fun. And if you're driving your own learning, there is a motivation there that is intuitive, instinctive, which generally is more fun than the opposite, but not always. Is that what you're saying? Oh.
Where I work, I'm a BCBA, so I work in a clinic with kiddos doing that ABA. I work with kiddos on the spectrum who do have sometimes behavioral issues, but a lot of it we're working with younger kids, and the approach I like to take is very much child-led, play-based. Granted, we do use assessments, but kids don't see it, and we don't pass-fail anybody, because that's awful. But we like to take kind of going off that approach of do we want to, we take a very much like an assent mindset with that. Like we want kids to want to be going that, because like you said, like it's really hard to learn and grow if you are miserable. I mean, there are opportunities for learning and growth within that, but we very much take like a happy, relaxed engage. I don't know if you guys know who Greg Hanley is. He is in ABA world. He very much wants it to be child-led, very much like trauma-informed, all of that fun stuff, but assent plays, I think, a big role when it comes to play, because I see kids all the time like, hey, do we want to go down to the playroom and like pick a board game? Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? And they're like, no, I kind of just want to sit here and play with a fidget toy. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Like whatever you want to do. So I think assent plays a big role in that as well. So
I was going to say that I think that frustration is okay in play. I think it's kind of that natural state of flow where you have the challenge but the peak interest, and that's very much kind of an essential part of the growing elements of play. And so I think it's okay to be frustrated and maybe not enjoy it all the time, but I do think that's part of just play in general. Yeah.
And kind of leading off of that, we talked about kind of sacrificing. So I homeschool my children, and so sometimes I would ask my older daughter to play trucks with my son. So trucks aren't fun for some people, but it is for a 3-year-old boy. And so sometimes she would have to go play trucks with him. And then I don't know if he would play Barbies with her, but the idea was that he was going to trade. You play trucks with me for a little bit, and then I'll go play something. I'll go play house or restaurant with you. So just sacrificing some of your time to maybe learn some skills. I don't know what truck skills you could learn, but just learning something about how other kids play.
Sure.
You learn directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So if you have a competition during play, I noticed that I'm a high school teacher and been teaching for a while, but I noticed if the winner is always the same or predetermined, the other kids lose interest in that particular game. So, I mean, that's just a point that I just wanted to bring out. if it's predetermined to be the winner of the play, nobody else wants to play with that kid.
Hang on just a minute. That reminds me of an experience that I had years ago in Texas, where we had created an enjoyable form of learning, and we were using it or experimenting with it at the junior high level in science. And the science teacher gave us the curriculum, and they had 9 weeks to cover a certain particular set of functions. And during that 9 weeks, every member of the class mastered every item in the curriculum because of the method that was used. They had a ball. They were enjoying it. But there was one, and now I'm illustrating your point, or one of your points, where the person who doesn't win and has always won, yeah, it has an effect. There was a young man in that class that came to us and asked, "How do you know who the smart kids are?" And the response of the trainer was, you can probably guess, all kids are smart. That young man, 7th grade, ended up in a mental institution with a nervous breakdown as a result of that comment. So, winning is very much a part of children's life, and it becomes a habit. But is winning necessary for play? Can you play without having winners and losers? Were you going to respond to that? Or?
Made earlier. I was just going to build off of the discussion of group play, kind of going back to what Selena was saying too. When you're playing it in a group, like you may have a way of how you want to play, but child-led is obviously the best method. But when you're having a group, this child is leading, and this child is leading, and this child is leading, so it doesn't always work out that way. Just in childcare, seeing group activities or a game, maybe Uno or Sorry or Monopoly, they may have certain house rules that they try to bring into their group setting, and they're all different. So what do you do when everybody's fighting about, oh, you're not supposed to do that, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this? And they're trying to lead, but it's not really working because everybody's fighting. So I think it's okay to maybe have some kind of facilitator, not adult-led, but adult facilitating, just to kind of coordinate what's happening. So I think that's also an option when you're playing.
Really briefly to that point, I realize I monitor recess, and which means that I'm an arbiter, or I'm asked to be an arbiter of myriad just little disputes about things that it's like, okay, I need to sit for 30 minutes to hear your narrative one more time. I'm going to hear your, but I've realized that one of the best things that, how do you not insert yourself so much in the situation where, this is a space now where I'm supposed to be playing and free, but now I have to kind of check with this monitor here to figure out, are things going the way they should be? But one of the approaches that I've started to take is to start to teach or guide towards self-advocacy. Have you told them that you don't like playing that way? Have you given your idea? Have you asked them to stop? Have you, and that kind of gives this an empowering element, I think, to your point of not coming in and manipulating the situation to now here are some all-powerful rules coming down to solve this problem, but it's more how do we help facilitate the growth in that one skill, which is really important for successful play in a group and may not be developed in settings where students are coming from, where they're not, this may be the first time they've had cooperative play is in these playground settings or whatever. So I feel that tension very much, so thank you for raising that point.
Dr. Tucker, can I add right there? I think, tying those two together, humans naturally crave structure. And there's a reason that children were intended to have a parent or an adult. And so, it's important that, or while it's important that kids are, directing, it's also important that there is somebody there that's a little bit more wise, has a little bit more knowledge, and can see the good intention of everyone to really rope it in and bring it together. So you're not taking away that they're child-led, and you're not making it completely adult-led, but you are, in a sense, facilitating or kind of bringing it back to center. Organized chaos is a great approach for kids because they get to look at what that looks like and they're right, but you're also ensuring the safety of everyone else.
Did you want?
This is indeed a learning lunch because I'm learning quite a bit here, and I'm past 50. But the question I have, so is stress a part of play? Because you brought up a very interesting question because it's multifaceted, it appears, because I see where that when you're playing, there's no failure, but yet there are experiences where you realize I didn't get it right, but yet there are certain children, I would think, if they're experiencing failure, they're going to go in a little different direction. But then, for example, if we're in music, in the arts, and I'm from the heart or by ear learning to play the piano, I'm enjoying it so much, and I'm not getting it right, but I'm continuing to discipline myself and practice, but I'm enjoying this through the whole process, and I'm not stressed out. So I think the question I'm asking, is there stress resident in play? And I'm learning. Yes, ma'am. This lady over here's got a response.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, she can go
just
first.
a minute.
It's okay.
You start now.
Okay. I personally think that question can just lead to the individual as a whole. I mean, so I have a younger brother, and if we play games or whatnot, his reaction to losing or failing at something is very different to me. If I lose, I don't care. I'm not that competitive of a person. I'm just enjoying it because I have fun. Now, my brother, on the other hand, he won't play trouble with me ever again because he doesn't like the losing aspect of it. And since it's a game of more so luck, it stresses him out and he doesn't like it. So I feel that your reaction to that failure, is contingent on a lot of things, but it is individualized. Your own mental health, the environment you grow up in, did your parents allow you to fail? Were you allowed to fail? And then were you encouraged to try again? Failure is okay, and that's a whole nother growth mindset that comes along with play. Now, if you weren't allowed to fail, then you're probably more stressed out by failing if that does happen, which it will because it's life. So I think that's pretty individualized and contingent on multiple areas of your environment and how you were brought up and how much play you were able to engage in growing up. So that's my whole.
Yes.
To your question about stress and also to the earlier presentation, I wonder, if an aspect of play is that when you talked about the relationship between play development and learning development and how through play it can also help us learn so much, which means it might help us retain and transfer knowledge to other experiences. One side of that is if you have a negative experience in play, you might also develop a self-narrative about what you might be good at or not good at. That's something, when I first started teaching in a middle school setting, I had an elective class that was theater. And I had the students in the classroom that were like, yes! And then I had the students who were like, why? Because, play, I think, there's not one cookie cutter way to do it. There's not a standardized approach to play, which is where I find play fascinating. And I think there's so much options, but I think there's an element of stress based on your own self-awareness or even preconceived notions of what's going to happen in play. And so I think there is an element of stress, and our ability to think about how we respond to stress might be an opportunity to think about play in a different way.
Yes.
So trying I want to also speak to this idea of stress, and through a couple of lenses. I think one, through my experience working with early childhood education, but was not necessarily my entry point into the education sector. But I realize I find myself realizing that a lot of the things that we need as adults, children need. Like we need physical activity, and we have reminders to tell us to get up and, stand up every 5 minutes or every 40 minutes or something like this, do some activity because we live sedentary lives. Children, right, at young ages cannot, right, they're just not meant for sedentary lives, and we weren't either. So we have like these structures to remind us to get back to that space. I recently attended a mental health first aid training, and one statistic was that anxiety is present in 4-year-olds. As early as 4 years old, a child is experiencing anxiety. Anxiety is a social, it's, behavioral, but it's a pressure from the outside. And so children need coping skills for anxiety. Play, we as adults, we seek out play, right, to balance the stress of our lives. Children need that too. So play is a space where they can experience stress, experience failure, experience, joy as well, fun as well. I think, again, that variety, it's not just one thing. It's more that those pressures are not as present. The pressure of the outside, the pressure of being evaluated, is not an awareness in that space or pressure. Those are sort of the ways I'm kind of wrapping my head around all of this, is how to value play. Is I think also sometimes in the way we describe it. If we describe it as purely fun, it should be fun. We are kind of equating it to this one dynamic, this one reality. And we as adults don't seek out always fun. We know that fun doesn't necessarily get us where we need to be holistically in this world. But if we do start framing it semantically as a place to struggle and thrive in that struggle, a place to grow, a place to explore failure, a place to find yourself, a place to find yourself with other people, maybe we can start adding value to that. And also recognize how that's actually contributing to the stress and anxiety that young children are facing.
Thank you. So fun includes a range of frustration from little to lots. I'm going to have one more. We haven't done number 3 yet, have we? Okay, we're running out of time. So we're going to have one more comment about number 2, and then we'll go to number 3.
But I've been thinking as everyone has been talking, and this kind of agree with what everyone is saying, but when I think of play, the core value, the essence of play for me is fun that you touched on. And fun doesn't mean you can't fail at it. Fun doesn't mean you won't find stress in it. I can play a game, fail, still have fun. I can play a game that stresses me out, but it's still fun and exciting. I think and play is also individual. So I think what is play for me may not be play for someone else, and I think that is just an activity, if that makes sense. So if it's not fun for the person, I wouldn't define it as play for that person. You are doing an activity, and you are playing, if that makes sense. So it's more kind of philosophical. If fun is not at the core, that is not play. You're doing an activity. If this person is having fun, this is play for this person.
Okay, so off script because we're going to number 3. For the next learning lunch, I'd like to know about how you guys feel about the participation trophy. Trophy, where
Okay, he said off script. Thank you. No. What you all so far have been assuring me of is that we in fact did pick, when we chose this topic, we picked a wicked problem. And wicked problems are those problems that have no solution. They only have challenges that have to be dealt with collaboratively and over time. And so let's move on now to number 3. How do we encourage a focus on the value of play in child development?
So we had actually a good discussion on this one at my table, but we kind of went into it with an approach of all of the things to avoid. So the list that you guys gave of like things to avoid. So we were like, okay, technology is so limiting. She was talking about how like the kids choose to be on technology over interactive play, that open-ended play, and like how to go about facilitating and encouraging kids to use alternative ways to play, to learn and grow from that kind of. So we kind of talked about more in like a school setting of encouraging and giving alternate options to kiddos to have them engage with resources that tend to encourage play and help teachers integrate that into classrooms. So that way, like, technology is available, but you're going to want to enrich the environment to where more of the open-ended play is more appealing to kiddos. So that was kind of how we talked about encouraging. Did I sum that up right? Was there anything you guys?
I like that term, open-ended play. Yeah. That makes sense. Self-directed.
So we touched on a few of the things that group touched on as well about like kind of increasing the awareness around some of the ways to improve play and the negative consequences of a lot of screen time. We also talked about kind of the more intentional aspects of putting it into the curriculum or increasing recess time in schools, which has been decreasing over the last few years, so kind of trying to place it within that structured environment that we know that most kids, if not all kids, are attending every day. We also talked about kind of that facilitation aspect, so having somebody that's attentive and responsive to that play and kind of validating if a child puts a pan on its head pretending it's a hat, being like, yes, you know, that is a connection, you're making some kind of connection to that prior knowledge you already have. We also talked about how it's an opportunity to model, and so in our conversation we were talking about like working with parents and how sometimes just even the ability to model what effective play or ways to enhance certain skill development through play is a really good way to focus on the value of it. And then kind of to sum it up, the last thing we talked about is just giving kids more flexibility in their time management essentially, and allowing kids to have time to just be kids.
We also took it from a little bit more of a school-based approach, but we summed it up into 3 points, and those are ensuring opportunities of safe exploration. So while we know that play looks different now, particularly outside play, than it did a decade ago even, still making sure that there is an opportunity for the child to explore and having that adult aspect that it's still safe. And we said flexibility in educating children. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter. It shouldn't be cookie cutter. If every child is doing the same thing, then we don't have children, right? And the last thing was listening to teachers in whatever form they come in, as they likely know what the child needs in that moment. They have a unique aspect and viewpoint, whether that's a classroom teacher, a homeschool mom, or any other aspect. But just making sure that you're looking at the whole picture of a child as a holistic view.
It's just an alarm. Thank you. We kind of touched on almost all of those. Arriving at a common definition of what we think is play, maybe circumstantial, maybe in that particular environment. Deliberately carving out time and a space for play, whether that's at home or in a classroom. And just making sure, kind of what we're doing now, having more deliberate conversations about the value of it in a classroom or in a home.
So I'll add a couple of things, but I want to go back to your recess thing, and I know Ron Hughes and some other people in here will see it. We talked about access to different settings, whether it's an outdoor setting or whether it's just the free time to do the kinds of things that they don't often get the time to do. We talked about unstructured opportunities, so you get to invent your own. What I was going to mention in terms of Ron, and those of you who have a school background, if you remember a few years ago, recess was removed from a lot of schools because they had so many minutes that you had to do certain things academically, which took away that freedom for students to do that. And I think that anybody who's been in schools would say yes, and behavior issues became more significant because the students didn't have that flexibility and time. This is just a college observation I made this year. So we have freshman learning communities in residential halls, and almost every time we do a craft, and they all do it. You were talking about them wanting to go play on like the playground. They will paint things, they will make bracelets, they will use Play-Doh, and it makes me wonder if their access to that has been limited for so long that it's such an intriguing thing to be able to have the freedom to do that.
Interesting. Yes. Other comments about how we make this better? How can we use play as a motivation to learning virtually everything? Can you use play to learn how to do better mathematics?
My answer to that is yes. I think you can use play to learn just about anything. I was going to say, in terms of the schools, like this idea of play has been around for decades, right? And so some of that play got taken out of the schools. Well, now all of a sudden this big buzzword is STEM or STEAM, and we're doing these STEM things. And so all of a sudden kids have pencil boxes with Legos, and it's their STEM bin, and it's this big new idea. Well, no, not really. They're just playing, right? They're just calling it something different. And so I just think that's kind of interesting is, some educators feel like this is outdated. Now like our kindergarten classrooms do not have centers anymore. There are no toys in kindergarten classrooms. But then all of a sudden this big new idea of STEM bins comes out. And I'm thinking, well, they're just playing. So I've been a big advocate for STEM at my school, right? Because I want kids to have those opportunities to play and learn and create. But I just think it's interesting how play is outdated and we don't do that anymore. But then, this new idea of STEM comes along, and it's really the same thing.
Okay. By the way, we're out of time, and so we're going to wind up now. I will take your comment. Emma is passing out a final assignment. You can't get out the door without turning this piece of paper in, and it requires just two items. So, and before I forget it, I want to thank Emma for who's been the background for all of this planning, and you all have heard from her in various ways. So, thank you.
Something I keep coming back to in our conversations today is how it seems like we're in agreement that play is important for everyone, regardless of your age. And I think if we all take time for ourselves to find those playful moments, whatever that might be, I think the more we experience it ourselves and it's a part of our everyday, the more likely we can value it and think about ways to share it with others. And so when you see me in my office coloring Dean Rutledge, I'm really being productive, I promise. but I think I think this is an opportunity to figure out where play exists in our lives as we think about it for the importance for young kids too.
What do you call what I do in a meeting in order to keep from going crazy, just doodling on a piece of paper? What do you call that? It's play. For me, it allows me to listen when my mind would wander otherwise. But whatever we need to do, we usually do. Sometimes we don't give children that option. We don't allow them the opportunity to do what they need to do, which is a safe, particular alternative, because it's against the rules or not according to our ideas or whatever. So, are there any other comments that anybody wants to make about this wicked problem? You will all receive the final report, which will be a summary of a lot of things you've produced, and you will receive a reference to the website or the place where you can observe the video.
So here, because we were talking about play and all participants, but it's one outlier, and that is the antisocial individual that doesn't want to play, doesn't want to be involved, wants to sit in the corner and just wants to be by themselves, and they're fine with that.
Would you say that for them that's play? If that's their choice and they're able to make that choice. All right, other comments? All right, folks, ticket out the door is in your hands and you can turn it in any way you want to or just leave it on the table. Thank you very much for coming, and I have really enjoyed your wisdom and experience. Thank you.